Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another special edition of Khmer Times Cross Talk. Today we are outside our studio. We are now inside the head office of the Documentation Center, Cambodia. And sitting on my left is Dr. Maug Zarni. Hello, sir.
Thank you for
Thank you for agreeing to our interview today. And we have a lot to talk about today. But please, first of all, can you please tell us about yourself? I forgot to introduce him. He's a human rights activist and a fellow of the Documentation Center of Cambodia, and very famous human rights activist. You can find him on Wikipedia, yes, please. But please, can you tell us more about yourself?
Well, I was, born and raised in the second largest city called Mandalay in Myanmar. Or I'm used to calling it Burma. My family is, Burmese Buddhist, and also we have a lot of, people who served in the Burmese armed forces since it was founded during the Second World War in 1942. And I wanted to be essentially a soldier when I was growing up, but my father stopped me from joining the officer, corps. And so when, in 1988, when students started to demonstrate against the Burmese military dictatorship, I was already determined to leave the country to go study in the USA. So I left Burma 1 month before the biggest uprisings called 8888, because it happened on the 8th of August 1988. So I was already in California when that happened. So I left the country without having witnessed all the killings and nationwide protests. But I've been an activist since 1988 because I met a lot of Burmese exiles who joined the anti-dictatorship movement, both peaceful and armed, since General Ne Win took power in 1962. So through them, I've been, trying different approaches to support the Burmese struggles for democratization and federalism.
Yeah. It has been over 1 year since the military junta overthrew the government led by Madame Aung San Suu Kyi. And since then, we see a lot of atrocity, violence, civil wars happening in your country, Myanmar. So, do you have any update on the situation right now?
Yeah, on the 1st of February, 2020, that's almost 2 years ago, the Burmese military, led by the commander-in-chief, Mayor Line, ousted Aung San Suu Kyi and her National League for Democracy because they won the second term. They won the first term in 2015, and then 2020, they won the second term as the most popular front, essentially. And the Burmese military felt threatened by the fact that maybe economic and some push for political reforms would curb the monopoly power of the Burmese military. So they came up with this bogus pretext of election frauds and voter irregularities, and they took over the state power. So what has been happening since is, like in 1988, there was a nationwide protest, following the coup, and as a reaction, popular reaction to the coup in February 2020. But the demonstrations spread across the country, towns and cities, as well as villages, and even like border towns in Burma, throughout Myanmar. They were peaceful, but after the military felt that the demonstrations were becoming very strong, calling for a return of the elected government. The military started shooting peaceful demonstrators. But unlike in 1988, the protests against the coup in 2020 turned into a widespread armed uprising. So young generation, Myanmar, from different ethnic backgrounds, university students as well as farmers and their children or workers, they, like media professionals included, university academics and doctors and whatnot. Hundreds of thousands have joined two different types of resistance. One is known as civil disobedience movement. So civil servants, government employees in different departments, including finance and foreign ministry, they decided to not go to work because they wanted to make sure that the military does not have the power to control and administer the state. So like more than half of the government employees refused to work. Trains stopped, the postal workers stopped working, and then electricians stopped repairing government buildings and things like that, right? They call it civil disobedience movement. It was initially led by doctors and nurses, and then later it spread to other sectors. And then the second type of resistance movement is armed, because we have been in civil war, with fluctuating degrees of violence and destruction, since essentially independence in 1948. So it's incorrect to say that Myanmar has plunged into civil war, because we were born into the civil war as an independent country, because if you have to look at the population makeup to understand the situation. We have a very high percentage of national minority vis-a-vis the majority Buddhist Burmese. So we have 30 to 40% of national minorities who are Buddhists, who are Christians, who are Muslims, right? They have been very unhappy with the way they have been treated, which is like as second-class citizens. So 30 to 40% of Burmese population with minority religious, ethnic backgrounds, they have been, resisting through different means. So the majority young Burmese who call themselves Generation Z or Generation Z have decided to go to the ethnic nationality armed resistance areas like Kachins and Shan and Karennis, Chin, Mon. We've got about 22 different armed resistance groups with different control of territories along the Chinese and Thai-Burmese borders or Indian borders, right? Or along the coastline, like Rakhine Kingdom. So they joined ethnic armed resistance groups because they felt that every single peaceful mass protest is always met with, slaughter, violence, killing, torture, mass prison arrests by the Burmese military in the last 60 years. So the young generation, unlike my own generation from 1988, they felt that the only way to end the violence and oppression by the military is to fight the military with arms. So what is happening today is Myanmar women, young women, they learn to make bombs, like what you call it, improvised explosive devices, IED, that's what happened in Afghanistan and other places. So young Myanmar women with university education or high school education, or some store owners who left their children and then they joined the resistance, young women in their 20s, 30s, They learn to make bombs. And some of them are not just making bombs. Some of them are running and leading the operation to blow up, telecommunication satellite stations run by the military, because those stations monitor the protest and resistance. And some of them actually become combat resistance fighters. So that's what's happening. And then the response from the Burmese military is I would say, semi-genocidal. Because genocide isn't simply about like killing people. It's like destruction of community, right? And so now the Burmese military is losing control of territories and population support. So they will go and repeat what they did to the Rohingya Muslims, in 2017, 2016, which is like destruction of hundreds of villages, right? Using heavy artilleries and airstrikes from gunship helicopters or jet fighters. And then, scorch earth, entire villages. If there are a couple of resistant fighters coming out of a particular village, the Burmese military will go and destroy and burn down entire villages and shoot into schools from, gunship helicopters, knowing that they're only children. So they're attacking communities to weaken the resistance, because resistant fighters have communities, local communities. Before, like in 2016 and 17, they target Rohingya Muslims. And then that's why, like almost 1 million had fled to Bangladesh across the border, right? So now the Burmese military is using exactly the same tactic. Not necessarily with the same intent, because they are killing their own people. They're like, talking about Buddhist Burmese villages the Burmese military is burning down. And in some cases, they were burning captured young resistant fighters alive, or like they're executing them. Like they call it legal murder, or legally murdering them. That's what's happening. So it's what we're witnessing is the deepening and widening of the conflict between the national armed forces and multi-ethnic society. Now the Burmese military no longer enjoys the support of the Burmese Buddhist majority. Usually the recruits, officers and rank and file members, like private soldiers, they came from this Buddhist Burmese majority who believed that the national army was their army and they're protecting Buddhism and the Buddhist population, if not minorities. Now, the Burmese majority no longer feel that this is a national army for them. They treat the Burmese military as terrorists. So if you go on Twitter, the most popular hashtag is Myanmar Military Terrorists. So that is how the population, in general, view the national army. So that's the situation.
So the People Defense Force, and I'm sure many people in Myanmar call the junta or the military government the terrorists. But at the same time, the military government called the PDS rebel. So how do you bet on this?
Well, I think like both sides. I mean, there are more. There are different groups. There are different armed the resistance groups. Some are just simply ethnic armed organizations that they may be less significant, but they would talk to the military for ceasefire. But there are also like armed ethnic organizations that are really resisting the Burmese military, right? They're known as ethnic resistance organization, EROs, right? And those EROs are the main networks that provide young Burmese the sanctuary training and food, clothing, right, protection. But in terms of the Burmese military, calling the Burmese resistance fighters, right? The people's defense forces, right? The people took up arms to defend themselves. So therefore, they call themselves People's Defense Forces. And People's Defense Forces, I think the estimates run about 700 groups across the country, different places. Even in big cities, they've got underground cells who will go and simply kill the military intelligence units. And so for the population, they feel that the Burmese military has become an alien occupier. You know, they all look the same. The soldiers and the resistant fighters, they all look the same. But what separates the two sides is that one side, the military, or formerly national military, is terrorizing the population, right? The Burmese resistance fighters are not burning down, say, like your military regiments or like killing the military families. They're targeting, you know, like intelligence officers, police, you know, the security forces, and military infrastructures. Whereas in fact, the Burmese military, on the other hand, is targeting civilians. Yeah? If you target civilian deliberately with the political intention or purpose of re-establishing your control or weakening the resistance, you know, whether you abide by the Geneva Convention or not, you know, if you're targeting civilian populations, yeah, deliberately, you know, okay, all right, you know, when we say civil war or military conflict, right, in the UN terminology, conflict, right, the parties in conflict would attack each other, right? That's accepted as, I guess, like normal in a conflict situation, right? But if you target communities, civilians that are not fighting you, then you are committing war crimes. And worse, that is a definition of terrorism, right? So the military calling the PDF and resistance fighters terrorists is just Orwellian, right? It's an Orwellian doublespeak, you know, war is peace, you know, that kind of thing. And so I think that is one of the major reasons the Burmese military is prevented from attending ASEAN meetings. And that is one of the reasons that even China agrees with the United States. China and USA, they don't agree on virtually everything, right? On Burmese military, they agree that the Burmese military is doing all these atrocities against its own people, not just the Rohingyas, not just committing a genocide, but they are committing, you know, like crimes against humanity and war crimes, right? Therefore, they should not be allowed to represent Myanmar people at the United Nations. So we're looking at a national army that is not accepted, you know, either by the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, you know, the ASEAN, even under Cambodia's leadership. You know, Cambodia is not a fully democratic country. I mean, that's a fact, right? And even Cambodia finds, you know, Myanmar military unacceptable to come and attend the ASEAN summit. That's why, like, you know, the Prime Minister Hun Sen, as a chair, issued a statement that Myanmar military would not be sending political representation at the foreign ministers' meetings or the summit, right? It's a consensus position of 9 ASEAN members, right? And then so we have a national military that is not accepted by the United Nations. They have no representation there, yeah? I mean, like, it's not accepted by Cambodia, it's not accepted by Indonesia, it's not accepted by ASEAN as a bloc. And so this is a sign of their lack of legitimacy, right? So this terrorist organization calling political defense forces formed by the people to defend themselves against the state army, right, cannot be in a position to say that the people are terrorists, because the PDF enjoys the popular support, of like thousands of neighborhoods and communities. So we are talking about a regime that is not accepted by the people at home, and that is not accepted by the international community, including the United Nations and ASEAN.
So several episodes earlier, I interviewed Duwa Lashila. I'm sure you have seen the interview, the acting president of the PDF. He claimed that the resistance force has grabbed over 60% of the country, despite having no external support. So it's just like the operation based only on the local donation from the people. So what do you see about it? Do you think that is true? I mean, the PDS controlling over half of the country. Do you think this is true?
Yeah, I think before the coup and the widespread armed resistance that spread across multiple regions of Myanmar, including big cities like former capital Rangoon, which is the largest, and the second largest city is my city, like Mandalay in upcountry, right? And so I think like when people say like 60% is under the control of the resistance groups, and also with there's a lot of them are allied with National Unity Government, NUG, right? Where, like you interviewed the acting president Duwa Lashila. And I think when we say or when they say that 60% of the country is under the control of PDF, I think we need to have a bit more nuanced understanding, because it is factually true that no city or no town in Myanmar today is safe because of the operations of the PDF, in different places, and so the soldiers and their families don't feel safe. And civilians who are associated with the PDF also don't feel safe, right? And so there's no safety in the country. In other words, Myanmar military is unable to discharge its main function of protecting civilian populations, right? But in terms of administrative controls, even before the 2020 resistance, or 2020 resistance became nationwide, the ethnic nationalities that particularly Chin, Kachin, Rakhine or Arakanese, Mon, Shan, Karenni, Karens, we are a very diverse country, and they have their own different regions where the territories are controlled by both the Burmese military units stationed in their regions, and they were also surrounded by ethnic armed resistance groups or armed organizations. They have their territories. So we cannot think of Myanmar as a country that's under a firm control of the Burmese military. There are regions, say for instance, WA, the United Wa State Army, that they borders with China, and the Myanmar military has absolutely no control, administrative, economically, or politically, or militarily. The WA, essentially a de facto state. The WA uses Mandarin language, the Chinese currency, Chinese technology. They get weapons from China, right? Myanmar military cannot do anything. And then, by the same token, in Rakhine State, where the genocide took place in 2017, the Arakanese army, they're very strong. And so more than half of the towns and villages are administered by the Arakan army. And so that kind of local administrations is mushrooming in different places, right? And also in Chin State, next to India in Western Myanmar, 70% of the territory is in the hands of the Chin National Front. Yeah? And so the Myanmar military, the troops are still there, but even the commanders of that troop, those areas, they cannot walk out to a cafe to get a cup of coffee. He'll get sniped. Yeah? So I think, but the only caveat that I would mention is that these are all contested territories. It's not like say like Lebanon, where like Hezbollah say this is our territory, no one comes in, right? So there are a lot of interactions and conflicts happening. So the best way to look at Myanmar today is not in terms of territorial control, but in terms of the society feeling that they are under a foreign occupation, like a fascist or Nazi occupation. So if you look at Denmark during the Second World War, under Nazi occupation, the Danes were killing the Nazi officers and collaborators. That's what's happening in Burma. So the PDFs are killing not just the army officers or security forces. They're killing the collaborators. So in a lot of places, the Burmese military cannot find a civilian to fill the administrative post as a village chief or neighborhood chief. Because if a civilian accepts the offer or appointment from the Burmese military, that civilian will get killed, you see. So that's a scenario. The best way to look at it is Myanmar as a society is in a very active resistance against what they consider terrorist occupying force.
Obviously, the human rights situation, let's say all kind of infrastructure, people, community, nothing is now safe in Myanmar. But in the meantime, do you foresee an end to this, to the end to the suffering, and how do you picture it?
Well, I think I would be lying if I tell you how this will end. I mean, there are different scenarios that I can speculate, but I cannot predict, because we are a country that has been at war. The Burmese majority versus the minorities, and some minorities are also fighting among themselves, and some are authentic or genuinely, revolutionary or pro-freedom type of organizations. Some are also operating more like warlords. They want to control resources, right? And so they make economic deals with the Burmese military. The Burmese military, like the armed organizations from minority groups, that just want to make business. Yeah? So they say, we'll give you business contracts, or we will allow you to develop the gold mine or jade mine. Don't attack us, we won't attack you. Don't also ask for democracy or freedom or federalism, right? So that's also another type of organization. So there are different armed organizations. There are also like young and idealistic Generation Z, who wants to build a new type of society where every religious or ethnic group is treated with fairness and equality and human rights, right? So there are multiple organizations in different types of conflict, right? So it's quite complicated, but broadly speaking, the main culprit of all the conflict that keeps multiplying. So in 1964 or 63, we only had about 6 different armed organizations, including the Burmese Communist Party, right? The first peace talk held between Myanmar military under General Ne Win at the time in 1963 and the so-called rebel groups, only about 6 or maximum 6 different parties in conflict with Myanmar military, right? Now we have like 2 dozens, about 23, 24 different armed organizations. Some of the minorities also splintered, along different views, along economic interest, the contest for leadership, right? And then but all of these conflicts have been multiplying because of the Burmese military, because the Burmese military views the conflict in society as something advantageous to them. So because they behave like a colonial occupying power, they try to divide society along religious and ethnic lines. They will pit the majority Buddhists against the Christians, or particularly against the Muslims, right? So that's why you see Burmese monks that, spitting out this like hate speech, saying that Muslims are destroying our country, Buddhist way of life. Therefore, we need to attack them. We need to drive them out of country, right? So when some of the religious people within Burmese society get swayed by this hateful Islamophobia, they lose sight of the fact that Myanmar military is the one that is creating all the troubles for everybody, right? And then also, I think like in terms of ending, the end game scenario, we cannot look at the election as the solution. The military is gearing up for elections after they have rejected just about every single election except 2015. Since 1990, Myanmar military organized and held 4 elections, right? And one they recognized because the military's proxy party won the election because it was boycotted by Popular National League for Democracy. And then the second election, 2015, was won by Aung San Suu Kyi, and it was allowed by the military, right, to form a civilian government because military felt confident that within the 2008 constitution drawn up by the military, no genuine democratic change could happen. They felt that the election, the government that came into power through elections could be straitjacketed, right? Or their wings are clipped, so to speak, by the Constitution, because the Constitution makes it impossible for any type of amendment, right? And the military puts itself above the society, above the law, right? So in 2020 election, Aung San Suu Kyi's National League for Democracy won a second term in a crushing victory against the military-backed party. So the military felt that we cannot allow this trend to continue, or like we will be pushed out of power. That's why they launched the coup in February 2020. So finally, I would say the elections are, of course, like part of any democratic system, right? But in a multi-ethnic country like Burma, where the minority percentage is very high, 30 to 40 minority population in a democratic system is a very high makeup for the minorities. In that scenario, the majoritarian democracy cannot address or satisfy the concerns and interests of the national minorities. If the Burmese Buddhist majority pick one party as their main party, like they did with Aung San Suu Kyi and National League for Democracy, they will always win. I mean, I'm Buddhist in Burma, from a majority background. We will always win because numerically and mathematically, we are the majority, 60%. We will always win, right? People vote for ethnicity, religious identity, not necessarily for the policy, right? Burma Buddhists will always vote for the Burma Buddhist politicians, right? That's almost natural, unfortunately. And so the minorities feel that these democratic elections are only 50% of the solution, and the other 50% is, the group equality. Yeah, that can only be guaranteed through a federalist system of government. So that, beyond human rights, beyond popular mandate. Popular mandate is always going to reflect the Buddhist majority. So therefore, they are saying we need to have a federal and democratic system. Democratic system alone is not enough. That is why I think, the national unity government, it is somewhat problematic because it bases its claim of legitimacy on 2020 elections. That election was held within the framework of 2008 military's constitution. And the revolution and the resistance that took place after the coup resoundingly rejected that constitution. So we could not make this self-contradictory claim that we are a legitimate government because our legitimacy, we are mandated by the popular democratic election, right? But that election was never meant to be for democratization. It was meant to keep the military in power. So we've got this gap between the popular sentiment and the goal of the resistance as a whole, which is reject 2008 constitution. And then and the claim of the NUG that we are the only representative engaged with us, allow us to come to the policy table. So the minority ethnic groups led by, say, Karans and Karanis and Chan and Kachins, they say, we also need to be invited to Burma policy debates and discussions. So the international community and ASEAN need to also listen to us because we have a 50% of the solution, which is creating a federalist state rather than a unitary state controlled by Burmese Buddhists, whether it's military or civilian Democrats, right? So that, if we understand the Myanmar problem as 50% democratic problem or lack of democracy and 50% lack of group equality, right? Group equality is different from basic human rights. Human rights, everyone is entitled. Group equality, that is guaranteed constitutionally in a federal constitution. So if we can, even if we defeat the military, those two, 50% solutions, democracy and federalism, they need to be married in a way that will help bring or transform the conflict. Conflict's necessary. Conflict's natural in every society. Even between husband and wife, you always have conflict, right? But you find ways to transform the conflict or address the concerns of the other party, right? The conflict is natural. Yeah, siblings fight, right? And even if we love each other as siblings, we fight. Like husband and wife, the same thing, right? Parents and children fight. That's not a problem. The problem is lack of a system that allows the conflict to be resolved in ways that is peaceful. So that the military solution of calling those the population that are defending themselves terrorists is not going to get Myanmar anywhere. So that's why I think the ASEAN and international community should really start to look at Myanmar's situation from the prism of the problem of lacking both federalism and democracy. And the military is not the solution. They have been in power since 1962. There's only one institution that has been in power in Myanmar since 1962. That's like how many years? 61, 62 years. And I was born 1 year after military took over power. I'm going to be 60 this year. All my life, they've been in power. They have proven to be absolutely incapable of building a peaceful, democratic, federalist state. If one institution is in power or has been in power for 6 decades, and all they have accomplished is multiply the military conflicts and terrorized the population as a whole and perpetrated a genocide against the Rohingya. That institution needs to be out of power.
Meanwhile, no one is still safe. No one is safe in the war, in the chaotic situation in Myanmar. So while the international NGO, international organizations like UN and ASEAN are doing their best and within their capacities to place pressure on the military junta, what can the others international actors, like individual countries especially, can do in the meantime to alleviate the pain and suffering of the people in Myanmar?
Well, one is provision of the humanitarian assistance, right? Because in 2017, Myanmar military killed unknown, uncountable numbers of like Rohingya Muslims, right? And then almost a million people fled across. And now, since 2017, since the end of mass killings and destruction in Rakhine State, yeah, we now have 1.4 to 1.8, these are estimated figures, internally displaced people from multiple ethnic communities, multiple religious communities. And so we're looking at a country that has, in 5 years, produced almost 3 million refugees and internally displaced people, right? The economy is on its knee because of COVID, because of civil war. Like farmers could not go farming. It's either because farmers' children have taken up armed and joined resistance, or the farmlands become killing fields and battlefields, right? And so the economy is in shambles. And so the people cannot feed themselves, right? So the resistance communities or organizations have to find food for them, right? Because they're not. So when your community is under attack, you have to feed them. So they don't have enough, and so international community can provide food, medicine, and clothing, and all that stuff. That's one side, but that's not going to address the problem. The problem. ASEAN has made a break in a very positive way from the past. The Myanmar military was accepted. Myanmar was fast-tracked into ASEAN membership in 1997. Now, the ASEAN Consensus is that this is 9-member consensus out of 10, saying Myanmar military must not represent the people of Myanmar as long as they keep slaughtering the people and burning villages, right? So that is something that I personally welcome. I know a lot of Western governments and human rights NGOs and media, have a scathing criticism of ASEAN, saying ASEAN is useless, ASEAN's not doing. I disagree, yeah? And ASEAN ought to be stronger and taking a firmer stand, but ASEAN, including, or I should say under Cambodia's chairmanship last year, ASEAN made a positive contribution to the Burmese people's struggle when ASEAN said, we will not allow Myanmar military to come to our meetings, ministers or the summit meet, And so I think that has to be the bottom line. As long as Myanmar military keeps killing people, the ASEAN must not allow a single military representative or anyone who's sent by the Myanmar military, ASEAN should reject, right? That's Indonesian's proposal now, not just ministerial level, director general or directors of different departments sent by the military, reject them, right? That's a good start. But there are more things that the ASEAN could do. ASEAN could, essentially, downgrade ambassadors, send the Myanmar ambassadors, and most of them are ex-military officers, send them back, right? And allow the democratic and ethnic representations in, say like a place like Phnom Penh. Allow the Myanmar Democrats, allow Myanmar activists to come and have an information office, openly, and provide them with protection. You see what I mean? So like we can explain to the Khmer people, what is happening, rather than read this Myanmar military statement saying, oh yeah, these young resistance fighters are terrorists. If you're framed as terrorists, people get scared, right? So if we have an office in, say, in Phnom Penh, either as National Unity Government or a coalition of democratic resistance organizations with ethnic minorities, they come and have a two-person office. They will get interviews to the Khmer Times or other Phnom Penh Post, every time there's a problem. And also they should be allowed to have meetings with the government officials to provide them on-the-ground updates on humanitarian situation, the human rights violations, war crimes, right? So that's another thing that the ASEAN can do. And then the other one is, of course, countries like Singapore. Singapore plays a really dodgy role. During the time of Khmer Rouge, Singapore was supplying Khmer Rouge with fuel. And then, we're in Phnom Penh, what happened as S-22 or S-21, right? And torture victims, after forced confession, they were transported by trucks to the Chang'e, yeah? And to be slaughtered by the thousands, right? And that's used by, that was done with Singaporean fuel. Trucks don't move without fuel. Singapore was selling fuel to Khmer Rouge. And Singapore was also buying fish from Khmer Rouge, right? So today, Singapore is the second largest investor in Myanmar after China. It's 24 billion US dollar. Singapore's investing, or in Myanmar. And recently, there was a report put out by former UN officials or special envoys on human rights, saying that Singapore is a major country where Myanmar military is transporting weapons through. You see that, and so Singapore should stop doing that kind of thing, right? It's one thing in 1975, 76, 77, during the Cold War, Singapore was supporting Pol Pot, right? But in 2021 or 23, Singapore should not be supporting, arming, and financing another genocidal regime in Myanmar. So individual countries, they should, and Thailand, the same thing. They should freeze the Myanmar military's account. But maybe they won't do it, but it's not that there are no options. There are options. They choose not to do it. By choosing not to, put pressure on Myanmar military, countries like Singapore or Thailand, I'm talking about governments, they are complicit in the war crimes committed by Myanmar military.
Yes, that's it. That's all of the questions. Thank you so much for your detailed insight on the issue of Myanmar.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, thank you, sir. Okay, that's it for our interview today. See you next week.